If you were to ask someone today to tell you all they knew of Juan Ponce de León, they would likely repeat back to you a number of myths, and not a single one of the few truths we actually have. One reason for this is the obvious allure of a fountain of youth, which if such a prospect has not yet piqued your imagination, give it time, it will. The second reason certain facts remain so scant is that the earliest narrative source concerning the two voyages of Ponce de León date to 14 years after his death, written by the Spanish historian Oviedo, using primary accounts now lost to us. And the most detailed account was written by the royal historian Antonio de Herrera in the year 1601, 88 years after de Leon's first voyage. The third reason de Leon's story, despite his name recognition, remains obscure is that de Leon's first expedition and his naming of Florida is so much earlier in time than many assume. Thinking the story of Spanish Florida would naturally follow Cortez in Mexico or Pizarro in Peru, where the Spanish will leave a far larger footprint, de Leon's first will take place 6 years before Cortez invades the Aztecs, and 19 years before Pizarro first attacks the Inca. And the exploits of these men will cast a shadow over de León, who, in the popular imagination, is brought to light through fanciful tales. The real Juan Ponce de León was born in a small Spanish farming town in 1474, to a noble family. Naturally, de León served as squire and knight apprentice to a knight and participated in the Reconquista in 1492, freeing the Iberian Peninsula of the Moors. His first cousin Rodrigo Ponce de León being one of the heroes of that cause. We'll find that this character is always in the vicinity of greatness without ever hitting the mark. On that note, while involved in this, 1492 would be the same year a man the Spanish called Cristobal Colon sails to what he believed to be the Indies. De León, likely using his family connections, secured a spot on Cristobal's second voyage a year later. It is here in 1493 that de León first sights the island that will become known as Puerto Rico. It is here that de León's true legacy lies, as he will leave a mark on Puerto Rico that reverberates through to this day. Florida, however, will always be more of a dream or an idea than a reality for him. From here, de León spends the next decade in obscurity, living an unremarkable life, perhaps moving back and forth from the Caribbean to Spain. But in 1504, he emerges in the historical record as the man tasked with putting down a rebellion of the natives at Higuey on the island of Hispaniola. De León did so in the most brutal fashion. Bartolomé de las Casas witnessed what the Spaniards wrought upon the native population and exposed these atrocities in his book, The Destruction of the Indies. Here is the portion of his account on the events concerning Higuey in the first few years of the 16th century. None of these applying directly to de León's actions, but merely to illustrate his world. The fifth kingdom was known as Higuey, and its queen, a lady already advanced in years, went by the name of Higeyama. They strung her up, and I saw with my own eyes how the Spaniards burned countless local inhabitants alive, or hacked them to pieces, or devised novel ways of torturing them to death, enslaving those they took alive. Indeed, they invented so many new methods of murder that it would be quite impossible to set them all down on paper, and however hard one might try to chronicle them, one could probably never list 1,000th part of what actually took place. All I can say is that I know it to be an incontrovertible fact, and do here swear before Almighty God that the local peoples never gave the Spanish any cause whatsoever for the injury and injustice that was done to them in these campaigns. The Spanish of the Old World were appalled by the actions of their brethren in the New, and whatever de León did to put down the rebellion, it earned him a promotion out of the local garrison to governor of Higuey in 1505. Which he quickly leveraged into putting together a survey of the island we now call Puerto Rico in 1506, in search of gold, which he had done in secret, as another Spaniard had these rights secured for another year. De León found that the natives of Puerto Rico indeed had gold. Governor of the Indies, Oviedo, the same man who had previously promoted de León to governor of Higuey, issued him a mining contract for the island, which in 1508 de Leon used as the legal basis for the foundation of his settlement of Capara, which is likely the oldest European settlement founded within the modern-day boundaries of the United States, Puerto Rico, of course, being a territory. It was here that he moved his family, had farms and cattle ranches. The Spanish would use the local chiefs in various ways to manipulate the natives into supplying gold. Violence at this time was always an option, but the Spaniards could also use the pre-existing power dynamics of a native hierarchy, wherein a chief with great authority could be lavished with gifts in return for the labor of their subjects in obtaining gold. This process would quickly devolve into slavery. With a settlement and a mining contract, de Leon became the de facto government of the island. But then suddenly, Diego Colón, son of Cristobal, became governor of the Indies after years of struggles with the king, who years before simply gave far too much power to the Colón-Columbus family and wished to claw back some authority. But Diego recovered the rights of his father and wrestled away with it all the powers to appoint island governors and approve contracts. He placed officials over the island of Puerto Rico and canceled de Leon's mining contract. De Leon petitioned King Ferdinand, who then appointed him governor. Diego then sued the king himself, and the court upheld Diego's right to make appointments. The king was rebuffed, and de Leon a beaten man. In consolation, King Ferdinand offered de Leon the right to settle and explore the islands outside of Diego's control, specifically the island of Bimini. This also served to limit the expansion of Diego's domain, who nonetheless sought a similar contract for his own brother that promised the crown a greater share of the mineral wealth. The king rejected this proposition. The New World, after all, was to be a Spanish realm, not a perpetual fief to the Columbus family. De Leon's contract would be valid for a 3-year period beginning in February of 1512. If he managed to make settlement on Bimini, he would become governor, or more specifically, an adelantado, which I might be saying wrong, which implied this endeavor would be undertaken with his own private funds, having no support from the crown. But this arrangement would continue throughout the history of Spanish America, where the Spanish crown could expand its domain at little or no cost, on the back of private investment in return for awarding rights, titles, and privileges to these investors. For de Leon, Bimini, and all points north of Diego's zone of control would not be a complete mystery, as the Spanish slavers, seeking to replace the quickly dying population on their Caribbean mines, already combed the shorelines on lands they left uncharted, capturing the unfortunate. And so de Leon's journey would be vague, but not a complete shot in the dark. Likewise, the natives of these islands and the mainland now had both experience with Spanish slavers and likely refugees among them, escaping the yoke of the Spanish and traversing the Caribbean as they had in pre-Columbian times. We will come to see that de Leon's expeditions will defy the stereotype of the passive and naive native. De Leon spent the rest of the year of 1512 preparing for his voyage. He acquired 3 ships and a crew and brought his mistress along. He was prepared to set sail out of Puerto Rico in February of 1513, but was delayed another 3 weeks until the weather proved in their favor, pushing off in March. Once at sea, de Leon took the north by northwest heading, charting a number of islands along the way, many of which were already likely sighted by Columbus years before. For de Leon, settling these islands opened up a replay of Spanish Puerto Rico, wherein de Leon surveys the land, subdues the natives, and then Diego uses his father's claim to take away everything from de Leon as de Leon had from its native inhabitants. These were cruel men living in a cruel world. De Leon would have to sail on. For even Bimini, he might lose to Diego in court. In late March, de Leon sights what he believes to be a large island. He makes landfall on April 2nd or 3rd, likely somewhere south of what today we call Cape Canaveral, finding outside of the sound of the surf a quiet land, seemingly with no inhabitants, covered in flowers. coinciding with the Spanish Festival of Flowers around the Easter season. He names the land Florida, takes possession for Spain, and hopefully for himself. He and his crew remain about 5 days. We have little record left to us today as to what transpired during this time, but they seemingly went the entire time without sight of any Native Americans. Finally, de Leon decides to depart from the site of his first landing somewhere on the east side of Florida, intending to explore back south and then westward to gain a sense of the size and shape of his island of Florida. This is the moment many credit de Leon with discovering the Gulf Stream, which in the future will fast-track many Spanish ships on their eastward journey home. But de Leon, intent on going west, had to fight against the current the entire time, so perhaps he discovered the Gulf Stream for Europeans anyway, but he certainly didn't discover its usefulness. To lessen the effect of the stream, he hugged the shoreline of Florida, which was a dangerous prospect for the time, especially in shallow, uncharted waters. In the open ocean, with the seafloor far from the bottom of your boat, rarely will these two things meet. But in shallow waters, an outcropping of rock or even a sandbar could spell disaster. It is because of their proximity to the coast that they spot their first native village on April 20th, but there is no record of the Spanish making contact or attempting a landing. On May 21st, or the days shortly thereafter, having spent over a month sailing since their first landing, de Leon only managed to reach the west side of Florida from the east, a testament to the power of the stream they were fighting against. Seeking fresh water and firewood, they attempt to make landfall somewhere vaguely near modern-day Charlotte Harbor. Immediately, the Calusa natives spot the Spaniards trying to careen one of their ships. Interpretations of what happened next vary, but 20 canoes full of Calusa paddled over to the San Cristobal, where they either tried to seize the ship or mistakenly believed they were helping the Spanish rescue their ship from a sandbar. Now, when I say canoe, you could think of a small birch bark canoe used on a riverway in the St. Lawrence, something like that. We're talking about large dugout canoes that were ocean-faring, carrying many men. So 20 canoes, you can imagine the amount of people that might be coming towards the Spanish, rather threatening. Whatever the truth of the matter, a fight broke out. A number of the natives were killed along with a single Spaniard, and 4 Calusa were taken hostage. De Leon quickly left this area and anchored the next day a few miles away, only to be met by a larger group of Calusa, who at first made gestures indicating they wished to trade, but quickly dropped the act. The two people engaged in a day-long sea battle that was constant but not terribly intense, both sides shooting projectiles and posturing to establish dominance. In the end, though, it was the Calusa who would have their way, as the Spaniards retreated into the open sea. The Calusa, however, were unable to recover their stolen people, one of which was an adopted Taino who had lived among the Calusa and knew some Spanish, confirming what we already suspected, that the refugees of the Caribbean sought safe haven on the mainland. Through the Taino man, de Leon learned of a Calusa chief named Carlos, who had gold in great quantities. We now know that the chief likely had gold that did not come from his own territory, but may in fact have been obtained through trade with the Taino and others in the Caribbean, meaning that de Leon's interest in Florida was sparked over gold coming from mines that his people had likely already plundered. The captives also knew of a few nearby islands. Here, de Leon could hopefully secure some fresh water, but the Spanish found that these islands were full of turtles, which they hunted and ate, but no fresh water. As a result, he named them the Dry Tortugas. On June 24th, de Leon reached the coast of what he believed to have been Cuba, but he found no evidence of the Spanish there, and only wild dogs running around. This left him bewildered. De Leon again sought the open sea. He had lost sense of his east-west direction, what we would now call his longitude. Again, probably as a result of the Gulf Stream, and he decided to try to backtrack to the Keys. It would not be until July 18th that he actually arrived in the Bahamas. There he found a ship under the command of Diego Marullo. an employee of de Leon's nemesis Diego Columbus. The crew certainly wished to return home, but de Leon knew that now more than ever he would have to find Bimini, which after all was his original intention. But after a month, Marullo loses one of his ships, and his crew is distributed among 2 of de Leon's 3 vessels. Now, even without finding Bimini, he resolved to return homeward with those 2 ships, for even the secret discovery of Florida could now be co-opted by the Columbus family, before de Leon had the chance to report his findings to the king. His 3rd ship, however, after de Leon leads Marullo and company away, is tasked with continuing to search for Bimini. He finally returns to Puerto Rico on October 19th, having been at sea for 8 months. Far longer than Christopher Columbus had taken in 1492 from Spain and back. In his absence, his settlement of Capara was attacked by a band of Carib natives from another island, and not the local Taino. He found his house in ruins. Somehow his wife and children survived. Diego Colon blamed the attack on de Leon for his poor choice of location. It would not be until February of 1514, nearly a year after leaving, that de Leon's 3rd ship returned. The men at least claimed to have found Bimini, and that was good enough for him. He then returned to Spain to confirm his governorship of Bimini, and hopefully secure the same for Florida. He even brought gold that he obtained in Puerto Rico to the king's court to convince him that Florida had the same mineral richness as the Caribbean. De Leon received his titles, but was given the immediate task of completely subduing the natives on Puerto Rico, and thus was appointed Captain General of San Juan Baptista, the original Spanish name for the island of Puerto Rico. And then the years pass. De Leon brutally undertook his mission, and before he could finally become El Delantado of Bimini in Florida, King Ferdinand dies. Such an event, in a kingdom at the infancy of the age of exploration, required the power brokers of the realm to return to the royal court and genuflect to the monarch for reconfirmation of their positions, privileges, and rights. De Leon, repeating his 1514 trip, returned to Spain once more, in 1516 to kneel before King Carlos I, grandson of Ferdinand, and perhaps better known as Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. De Leon has his titles confirmed at the cost of 2 more years of his life. It isn't until 1518 that he returns to Puerto Rico and to his family to find his wife Lenore quite ill. She passes in 1519. De Leon is now a 45-year-old widower. Hernan Cortez, a man many years his junior, is at this time in what will become modern-day Mexico, finding empires like the Aztec, with seemingly endless supplies of gold, and a vast, sedentary, agricultural-based population that could be potentially governed, while de Leon continued to be the El Delatado of sand and flowers, supposedly the governor of 2 faraway places, not having a single soul at either who even knew his name. To make matters worse, the Spanish governor of Jamaica sends Alonso Alvarez de Pineda to chart the Gulf of Mexico and to find his way to Veracruz, intent on planting another colony on the mainland. He is the first Spaniard to note the Mississippi, which he names Rio de Espiritu Santo. I hope I'm saying that right. Which means River of the Spirit of the Saints, something like that. He also discovers that Florida is not an island, but a peninsula of the mainland. Alonso's colony was short-lived and the settlers were massacred by the Huastec natives. De Leon then now had another dilemma. If he was to be governor of Florida by right of discovery, well, that made sense in the Spanish system if Florida was an island, but as a peninsula, perhaps a dozen different Spaniards could now throw something against the wall by way of a claim, just to see if it stuck. Even Diego's father, Christopher Columbus, sighted the North American main on his 4th voyage, which began in 1498. In November of 1520, de Leon wrote the king to inform him that the death of his wife delayed his plans, but he planned to settle Florida soon. He writes again in February of 1521. In this letter, he still refers to Florida as an island. This might be out of ignorance, or it is an attempt to keep his claim valid, as he leaves for Florida within the month. Just like his first voyage, de Leon will now take on this endeavor with no financial aid from the crown. He invests 6,000 gold pesos of his own ill-gotten gains, and he takes on a partner, Pedro de la Mata, to finance the rest. And to his credit, he gathered together married couples, about 200 people total, horses, livestock, seed stock, and farming tools. De Leon is landing in North America better prepared than the settlers of Plymouth 99 years in the future from this point. If de Leon's colony had the natural increase that Plymouth experienced, nearly all of the Americas would now be Latin America. Retracing his 1513 route, de Leon finds Florida, but in a decision historians still contemplate. De Leon decides to settle on the west side. Yes, not the east side, where he found a beautiful, seemingly empty land full of flowers, but rather the west side, where he twice battled the natives, who met him in the ocean itself to take their stand, more or less winning the second engagement. So why settle there? Well, de Leon's personal history with the process of colonization and the news of Cortez in Mexico set the model for a successful Spanish colony, as de Leon had done in Puerto Rico, beginning with trading with the natives, then use their pre-existing hierarchy to have the native population work for you, or exploit pre-existing rivalries. In time, this wearing away of what the natives know become genuine subjugation. And then when the natives rebel against this, you now have your justification to fully assert your rule, oppose all opposition, and institute genuine, real, visible slavery. While later colonizers might see an empty land as opportunity, de Leon's experience told him that a population of natives like the Calusa, with a chief the Spanish called Carlos, who supposedly had a stockpile of gold, would be his pathway to the greatness Diego had robbed him from in Puerto Rico. Still, it was a dangerous gamble. De Leon made landfall somewhere near Charlotte Bay, in the same area as his last voyage. On July 1st, 1521, the Calusa appeared. In the intervening years, the slave raids along the coast continued without reprieve, and de Leon, taking 8 himself the last time around, did not help the situation. The details are scant concerning what happens next. But again, the Calusa successfully defended their territory. An unspecified number of Spaniards are killed. De Leon himself is shot in the thigh with an arrow. His own nephew is injured worse. At this point, de Leon must have abandoned his settlement immediately, because his ships arrive in Cuba within the week. On the voyage back, the injured in his crew begin to die one by one, his nephew being one of them. In a town that we now call Havana, or Habana, I'm going to say it wrong, it's fine. De Leon lingers on until July of 1521, dying slowly from infection. He arranges for his horses and ships to be sold off to leave something for his family. He prepares a will, and then he dies. Once dead, authorities in Havana take the boats and the horses. De Leon's family would spend the next few years trying to receive some compensation from the courts. Many of the survivors of his second expedition then joined Cortez in Mexico. In another stolen legacy, de Leon's people become part of the story of Mexico, not Florida. The settlement he created in Puerto Rico is abandoned. The author Doug Mack describes the modern-day ruins of Caparra, which is still mostly uncovered under a long stretch of urban highway near a pool supply store and a veterinary clinic. But it is here in Puerto Rico that de Leon's real legacy lies, for he, more than anyone, is responsible for the introduction of Spanish culture and responsible for the reduction of the native population. Again, a cruel man in a cruel world. It is fitting that a native arrow would be his demise. He would get as good as he gave. His grandson and great-grandson would eventually become governors of Puerto Rico, so as it turns out, de Leon's family didn't need Florida after all. But most important to this program, and to our show, the Leon did invent the idea of Spanish Florida. He named it. He claimed it. It was his briefly, at least on paper. And even if no one there yet knew it in the early 16th century, the reality of Spanish Florida would persist into the 19th century. And it is here that we leave Ponce de León, the original Florida man. He went to the beach, kidnapped some folks, got shot in the leg, sailed to Cuba, and died. I can see the headline now. This has been the Other States of America History Podcast. I'm Eric Yanis. Thank you for listening.